My name is Hester. In the corridors of the Boston General Hospital, they used to call me the Iron Nightingale for 45 years. I held the hands of the dying and cleaned the wounds of the forgotten. I retired 7 years ago with a modest pension and a house that smelled of lavender and old books. I thought my sunset years would be spent in peace, but betrayal has a way of finding you even in the quietest suburbs. My son Iñaki was my pridor, so I let myself believe. He worked in consulting, a vague term that usually meant moving other people's money around while making none of his own. 5 years ago, after a minor dizzy spell, he sat me down with a look of faux concern. "Mom," he said, holding a legal document like it was a holy relic, "you're getting older. We need a power of attorney, just in case you get sick. It's for your protection." Protection. It's a word people use when they want to build a fence around your life so they can rob you inside it. I signed the paper. I trusted him because he was the boy I had tucked into bed for 18 years. But as a nurse, I learned to read the symptoms before the disease takes over. The symptoms started small: a missing $100 here, a strange withdrawal at a bank branch in a city I never visited. Then came the 70th birthday party. Iñaki insisted on a grand gala at the Fairmont Copley Plaza. "You deserve the world, Mom," he told me, while his wife, Sophia, picked out the most expensive champagne on the menu on my credit card, of course. I watched them from my armchair, two vultures in designer clothes, celebrating a life they were secretly draining. During the dinner, Iñaki stood up. He clinked his glass, silenced 80 guests, and looked at me with a smirk that didn't reach his eyes. "A toast to my mother," he announced. "A woman who has finally found someone as desperate as she is. A bank that still accepts her checks." The room laughed awkwardly. He called me a burden wrapped in a joke. He didn't know that 3 minutes prior, I had handed a USB drive to the hotel's technician. As he sat down, the lights dimmed. A large projector screen descended behind him. "I have a small surprise for my son," I said into the microphone, my voice steady as a surgeon's hand. Instead of childhood photos, the screen displayed 5 years of bank statements. Red circles highlighted every transfer to Iñaki's secret accounts. The total was nearly $300,000. The silence was deafening. I saw the color drain from Iñaki's face. Sophia dropped her glass, the red wine spreading across the white tablecloth like a fresh wound. I stood up, leaning on my cane, and looked my son in the eye. "You called me desperate, Iñaki, but I spent 50 years watching people die. I know exactly what a heart looks like when it's rotting. And yours has been black for a long time." The guests began to whisper. I didn't wait for his excuses. I walked toward the exit, where my old friend Mr. Brooks was waiting with 2 police officers. I had spent 6 months gathering the evidence, working with Brooks in the shadows while Iñaki thought I was just forgetful. The Iron Nightingale wasn't singing anymore. She was delivering a sentence. The party continued, but for Iñaki, it had secretly turned into a wake for his reputation. As the guests whispered, I remembered how my investigation began. It all started 6 months ago when I discovered that my savings account money I had spent decades saving for my grandchildren was melting away like ice under the Boston sun. I turned to Mr. Brooks. We had worked together at the hospital for years. I was the head nurse and he was the chief of security. Now retired and working as a private investigator, he took one look at my bank statements and shook his head. "Hester, this isn't a bank error. This is a systematic robbery. Whoever holds your power of attorney is slowly bleeding you dry." Brooks discovered that Iñaki was drowning in debt. His consulting firm was nothing but a front for failed investments in crypto exchanges and high-stakes gambling. To maintain his image as a successful businessman and fund Sophia's expensive tastes, he needed cash. My cash. He had been taking out loans in my name, forging my signatures, and moving funds through a web of shell accounts. The most painful discovery was that he was planning to mortgage my house, the home my husband left me to ensure I was always safe. Iñaki and Sophia had already started scouting luxury assisted living facilities in New Jersey. In reality, it was a cheap, run-down nursing home where I would be out of sight and out of their way. They wanted to box up my life and ship it off just to claim the last of my assets. "They think you're old and helpless, Hester," Brooks told me in his cramped, file-filled office. "They think you won't notice a few thousand missing here and there." I looked at my hands that had set thousands of IVs and saved countless lives. "They forgot that nurses notice everything, Brooks. We see the slightest change in a pulse long before the monitor even beeps." We decided not to go to court immediately. I wanted the exposure to be public, right where his ego was the most inflated. I continued to play the role of the forgetful mother. I let Iñaki lead me by the arm. I smiled at Sophia as she bought another $3,000 designer bag with my card. Every cent they spent was another nail in the coffin of their financial ruin. I learned that Iñaki owed money to some very dangerous people. His investors were breathing down his neck, and my 70th birthday was his perfect opportunity. He had invited his creditors to the gala to show them he was in the game, proving he had access to the Tanook family fortune. He was selling me off piece by piece during dinner. When he raised that glass and called me a burden, he was trying to humiliate me to make himself look stronger to his associates. He had no idea that Mr. Brooks had already handed over all the evidence to the white-collar crime division, and that the officers at the doors were only waiting for my signal. I saw Sophia trying to hide her purse under the table as if that could hide the theft. In their eyes, I saw no remorse, only the fear of a trapped animal. I took a sip of water and grabbed the microphone again. "The show isn't over, Iñaki. Let's look at the next slide, the one showing the beneficiaries of your offshore accounts." The ballroom, which only moments ago was filled with the sounds of clinking crystal and polite laughter, was now as silent as a graveyard. Iñaki stood there, his glass halfway to his mouth, frozen like a statue of guilt. The blue light from the projector reflected off his sweat-beaded forehead. He looked at the screen, then at me, then at the guests who were now looking at him with pure disgust. "Mom, this is a misunderstanding," he finally stuttered, his voice cracking. "I can explain. These are just business transfers. I was managing your portfolio." But the numbers on the screen didn't lie. $50,000 for a luxury car lease, $20,000 for a jewelry boutique in Paris, $100,000 withdrawn in cash at casinos. The Iron Nightingale had laid out the autopsy of his greed for everyone to see. Sophia tried to salvage the situation. She stood up, smoothing her crimson dress, her eyes darting around the room. "Hester is confused," she shouted, her voice shrill. "She's 70 years old. She doesn't understand digital banking. This is just a glitch, a terrible mistake." She looked at the guests, pleading for a support that wasn't coming. I didn't say a word. I simply pressed a button on the remote, the screen flickered, and a video began to play. It was a recording from the hidden camera Mr. Brooks had installed in my study. In the video, Iñaki and Sophia were laughing while going through my jewelry box. "The old bird won't even notice the pearls are missing," Sophia said on tape. "By the time she wakes up, she'd be in that nursing home, wondering where her life went." That was the final blow. The gasps from the audience were like a physical wave. Iñaki's consultant friends, the people he was trying to impress, began to walk away from the table. They didn't want to be associated with a man who robbed his own mother while she slept. Iñaki realized his social and professional life in Boston was over in a matter of seconds. Desperate, Iñaki lunged toward the projector, trying to pull the cables. Turn it off now," he screamed. But Mr. Brooks stepped into his path. Brooks didn't move an inch. "Sit down, Iñaki," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "The police are already at the service entrance. Don't make this harder than it already is." Sophia saw the police officers entering from the back of the hall and panicked. She grabbed her designer bag and tried to push through the crowd toward the side exit. I had nothing to do with this. It was all him, she yelled, betraying the man she had conspired with only seconds after the ship started sinking. But an officer was already there, blocking her path. I walked toward Iñaki. The guests parted from me like the Red Sea. I stood in front of him, and for the first time in years, I saw him not as my son, but as a patient with a terminal moral illness. I spent my life saving strangers. Iñaki, I whispered. I thought I could save you too. But you can't cure a soul that doesn't want to be healthy. You're sending me to jail, Mom. Over money? He hissed, his eyes filling with a mixture of rage and cowardice. It's just paper. I shook my head. It's not about the paper, Iñaki. It's about the trust you burnt to keep yourself warm. It's about the house you tried to steal. It's about the mother you tried to erase. The lead officer, Sergeant Miller, stepped forward. Iñaki Tanakh, you are under arrest for grand larceny, embezzlement, and elder financial abuse. As the handcuffs clicked shut, the sound echoed through the ballroom. The man who had called me a burden was now being led away like a common thief, his head hanging low. Sophia was also detained for questioning regarding the forged signatures. As they were led out, the room remained in a state of shock. My jubilee had turned into a courtroom, but I felt a strange sense of lightness. The weight of the lies I had been carrying for 6 months was finally gone. I turned to the guests. I apologize for the evening's entertainment, I said into the microphone. But as a nurse, I know that sometimes you have to cut out the infection to save the body. The dinner is over. Please, go home to the people you actually love. Mr. Brooks walked over and put a hand on my shoulder. You did well, Hester. What now? I looked at the empty ballroom, at the spilled wine and the abandoned gifts. Now, Brooks, I said, I'm going to go home, lock my doors with a new set of keys, and sleep for the first time in 5 years. The months following the gala were a blur of lawyers, depositions, and sleepless nights. The news of the nursing home nurse who caught her son spread through Boston like wildfire. Iñaki was out on bail, living in a cheap motel after I froze all the accounts. He tried to call me every day, leaving pathetic voicemails about family values and temporary lapses in judgment. I didn't listen to a single one. The trial took place in a gray, imposing courtroom in downtown Boston. Iñaki looked terrible. His expensive suit was wrinkled and the smugness had been replaced by a hollow, desperate look. Sophia wasn't by his side. She had already filed for divorce, trying to distance herself from his criminal activities to save her own skin. Watching them turn on each other was like watching 2 scorpions in a jar. When I took the stand, the room went silent. Iñaki's lawyer tried to paint me as a vengeful, confused old woman. Mrs. Tanakh, isn't it true you've been having memory lapses? Isn't it possible you authorized these transfers and simply forgot? He was trying to use my age as a weapon against me. I looked him dead in the eye and recited my medical license number and the dosages of every medication I had administered in my last week of work. My memory is perfect, counselor, I said, my voice echoing in the chamber. I remember the exact date my son forged my signature to pay for his gambling debts. I remember the smell of the perfume he bought his mistress with my pension money. And I certainly remember the day he tried to sign me away to a facility where I would be sedated and forgotten. Iñaki couldn't look at me. He stared at the floor, his hands shaking. His defense collapsed when Mr. Brooks presented the final piece of evidence. A secret recording of Iñaki talking to a shady real estate developer about liquidating the old lady's assets. It wasn't just theft anymore. It was a conspiracy to dismantle a human life. The judge, a stern woman who reminded me of the head doctors at the hospital, didn't hide her disgust. Mr. Tanakh, she said, looking over her glasses, you didn't just steal money. You stole the safety and dignity of the woman who gave you life. There is no financial figure that can compensate for that level of moral bankruptcy. Iñaki was sentenced to 5 years in state prison for grand larceny and elder abuse. Sophia received 2 years of probation and a heavy fine for her role in the forgeries. As the bailiff led Iñaki away, he stopped and looked at me one last time. "Mom, please, don't do this. I'm your only son." I stood up, leaning on my cane with pride. "You were my son, Iñaki, but the man standing there is a stranger who tried to kill my spirit. I'm not doing this to you. You did this to yourself the moment you thought my love made me a victim." Leaving the courthouse, the air felt different, cleaner, sharper. Mr. Brooks was waiting by his car. "It's over, Hester. The house is officially back in your name only. The trust is secured." I nodded, feeling a strange mix of grief and triumph. I had lost a son, but I had found my own voice again at 72. People in the neighborhood started calling me the guardian of the elders. Other seniors who were being bullied by their children started coming to me for advice. I realized that my mission as a nurse hadn't ended, it had just changed departments. I wasn't healing bodies anymore. I was helping people protect their boundaries. I spent the next few weeks reclaiming my home. I threw away everything Sophia had bought with my money. I repainted the guest room, turning it from a storage space for their greed into a bright, sunny library. Every brushstroke felt like a prayer of liberation. Iñaki sent me a letter from prison. He blamed me for destroying the family. He still didn't get it. He thought family was a shield he could hide behind while he committed crimes. I burned the letter without reading past the first paragraph. I didn't need his poison in my new, clean life. I sat on my porch that evening watching the sunset over the Boston skyline. I had my dignity, my home, and my peace. It had cost me dearly, but as I've told many patients over the years, the surgery is painful, but it's the only way to live. After the trial, the house felt larger but not emptier. I realized that for years I had been shrinking myself to make room for Iñaki's ego and Sophia's greed. Now, I occupied every square inch of my home with pride. I filled the rooms with the things I loved: fresh jasmine, stacks of historical novels, and the sound of jazz records playing in the afternoon. But I couldn't ignore the calls from other seniors in Boston. My story had given them courage. One afternoon, a woman named Martha sat in my kitchen, her hands shaking as she showed me bank statements similar to the ones Iñaki had forged. Her daughter was doing the same thing. In that moment, I knew my retirement was over. I had a new ward to protect. With Mr. Brooks's help, I started a small volunteer group called the Silver Shield. We operated out of my living room twice a week. We taught seniors how to monitor their digital accounts, how to spot the signs of financial grooming, and when to say no to their own children. I wasn't just a nurse anymore. I was a guardian of dignity. Iñaki wrote to me again from prison 6 months into his sentence. This time, the tone was different, twining and self-pitying. He complained about the food, the cold, and how cruel it was for a mother to abandon her child in such a place. He still viewed himself as the victim. I didn't write back. Some wounds only heal when you stop touching them. Sophia vanished from the social circles of Boston. Without my money to fund her high society lifestyle, her friends dropped her like a used coat. I heard she was working in a retail store in another state, finally learning the value of $1 earned by her own hands. I felt no joy in her downfall, only a profound sense of justice. One morning, I visited the cemetery where my husband, Anthony, was buried. I stood by his grave and told him everything. "I saved the house, Anthony," I whispered, "and I saved myself." For the first time since his funeral, I felt like I could breathe without a weight on my chest. I had honored his memory by refusing to let our legacy be stolen by a coward. Mr. Brooks became a constant presence. We weren't a romantic couple, but we were partners in the truest sense. We spent our evenings reviewing files for the Silver Shield, or just sitting on the porch watching the neighborhood children play. He reminded me that loyalty is a choice people make every single day. I decided to use a portion of the recovered funds, the money the court managed, to claw back from Iñaki's hidden accounts to establish a scholarship for nursing students at Boston General. I wanted to help the next generation of iron nightingales. I wanted my money to go to people who actually understood the meaning of service. My house, once a target for a developer's wrecking ball, became a sanctuary. The garden was thriving. I planted a new rose bush for every person the Silver Shield helped. By the end of the year, my backyard was a riot of colors: red, white, and gold. Each flower represented a life that wouldn't be stolen. Iñaki's lawyer reached out to me, asking if I would support a request for early parole. He said Iñaki was depressed. I told the lawyer that I spent 45 years as a nurse, and I knew the difference between depression and regret for being caught. I declined to sign. Justice isn't a suggestion. It's a consequence. People often ask me if I hate my son. I tell them that hate is too strong an emotion to waste on someone who doesn't exist anymore. The son I loved was an illusion I created. The man in prison is a lesson I had to learn. I don't hate him, but I don't owe him my peace. My 71st birthday was coming up. This time, there was no grand ballroom, no expensive champagne, and no fake toasts. Just a small dinner on my patio with Mr. Brooks, Martha, and a few neighbors who had become my real family. We laughed until our sides ached, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like a burden to anyone. As I looked around the table, I realized that at 71, I was finally starting my best life. I had cut out the infection, the wound was closed, and the scar was a mark of strength, not shame. I was Hester, and I was finally free.